The tale I'm going to tell is true, and the names have not been changed to protect the innocent, though I won't use last names. Anyway, it was the late 70s when I moved out of my parents' house in 77. I got a job at a warehouse that summer, and me and my best friend Rex moved out in like February with another guy. That's a whole other story, the other guy. But anyway, I wasn't much of a partier in high school. I went to the keggers and I'd have a beer or two and be buzzed off a beer and then not really like beer and quit drinking beer and didn't smoke pot. I think we did one time my junior year at a party, but we were pretty buzzed from beer, so I don't know if it affected me. But in the 70s, in my generation, my high school class and the few after and the few before, pot was a big deal. Everybody smoked pot. And you could get pot. It wasn't legal. Didn't cost as much as it costs nowadays, from what I hear. I don't smoke pot now. But I guess the pot nowadays is quite expensive, but quite potent, where it doesn't take much to get you very, very blasted, from what I hear. Okay, I don't buy it. Haven't smoked pot for a long time. But back in the day, you could get some Colombian gold or whatever we called it. You get like a 4-finger baggie full. So a baggie about that full for like, I don't know, like $40. So, it wasn't real expensive, and it, you had to smoke a little more of it, but you got a nice chill buzz. So anyway, the first time I smoked pot, I lived at my parents' house. I was working at the warehouse, 3 to 11. And Rex worked there too, but he worked third shift. And I met a guy named Keith. And Keith he had the perfect hair. And he was a small statured young man, but he was cool. I mean, he just was cool. I was this geeky 18-year-old, and he was cool. And we struck up this friendship, and he said, "Do you want to get high?" And I said, "Sure." So after work, we sat in the parking lot at in his car, and we proceeded to smoke a doobie. And I could visibly see him changing. His eyes got glazy, and he wasn't going to giggly, because he was an experienced long-term buzzhead. He was young though, but he was a buzzhead. He was he was older than me by like 5 years, and I was 18. So we listened to music, and he was getting into the music, and he kept saying, "You don't feel this? You don't feel this?" And I'm like, "No," and I'm puffing on it, and I'm coughing, and nothing happened. So I went back to my parents' house that night and slept all night and got up the next day, and I talked to my mom about it. I said, "Yeah, I tried pot last night," and my mom, she wasn't judgy or anything like that. She was terrific, and she said, "I would probably smoke pot if I was a young person, or at least try it." And so that was it. Well, then fast forward 6 months later, we move out, me and Rex, to a place, and we have a third guy too. That's a whole nother story. Jim was his name. But anyway, a friend from high school who was a known buzzhead, we got a hold of him with the intent of smoking some pot, because we knew that Russ always had pot. He was still in high school, but he was a cool guy. He was funny. And so he came to our apartment with his paraphernalia, papers, and bongs, and all this stuff, and some pot. And so we proceeded to smoke this pot. Well, this time, unlike the time in July, we definitely felt it. And there was a lot of giggling and laughing. And me and Rex were easy to laugh anyway. And we were out of control laughing, and it was a terrific experience. I mean, we jammed to the music, we got out a box of dry cereal. It was like the best thing ever as we're munching it in, and it was just a very, very good time. Unfortunately for me, when I have an experience like that, I want to do it again and again and again and again, which I proceeded to then after we found a guy to buy pot off, whose name was Glenn, we bought pot all the time, and I think I was high every day for like 3.5 years. And so anyway, Rex fell in love, and he found his now wife, but they moved out together, and I had a friend who took his place, named Mike, and we shared this apartment. Well, then we moved out to my brother Mark's house. Mark had been divorced like earlier that year, and he had this 3-bedroom house. And I'm not going to say I contributed to Mark's divorce in a great way, but I think the night that he spent at my house, because he was a straight-laced guy at the time, he was actually being something he wasn't with this woman, but I don't want to get into that. Anyway, we smoked pot, me and Mark, and we had some wine, and we just talked, and we talked about our lives and our family and music, and it was just a great evening of bonding with my brother Mark. And anyway, that didn't help his marriage at all. But anyways, they divorced. There's a lot of rabbit trails on this story. So anyways, we moved in when our time was up in that other apartment. So there was my friend Mike, Mick, and Mark. That's my brother's names too, Mike, Mick, and Mark, and Daryl. But anyway, we moved into Mark's house, and it was a nice place. So fast forward to 1980, and we'd been there a year or two, and Mike had a girlfriend, and he wasn't home much. Mark had a couple girlfriends. I didn't have anybody. I was unattached, and which was usual for me. So one day we went out to Rex's house in Parkview, and when we drove out there, and Parkview was very sparse back in 1980. There was there was like this small strip mall with a building next to the strip mall, and that was it, big field. And then there was the apartments that Rex lived in. And so anyway, we noticed this pot growing behind this building, and it was pretty tall, and it was growing wild and free, and being the buzzheads we were, and we made this mission to go out and take that pot. So we went at night. It was probably me, Mark, and Forrest, or me, Mag, and Forrest. I don't know who it was. But we pulled all this pot up, and we put it in the back of my pickup. Well, as was par for me at the time, my gas tank wasn't empty, and I didn't have enough gas to get home. So I had to pull underneath the well-lit gas station lights and pump some gas. We were all real paranoid because, we had a truck bed full of pot. So we put our coats over it. It was like October. Anyway, we got out of there unscathed, and we got home, and we hung it up in Mark's attached garage on the roller runner things. So we had all this pot hanging on the rollers. So we let it dry for a few weeks, and then it was a Sunday, and we decided to try it. And so Mark wasn't home, but I had 2 friends over. I had Forrest and my buddy Mag, and the Bears were playing, and I was an avid fan at the time, so we always watched the Bear games. And so we were watching this Bear game, and we proceeded to process this pot out and put it on our pot tray, and rolling doobies and packing bongs and doing all the stuff that potheads do. And it was terrible. It was like you could smoke as much of this pot as you want, and you weren't going to feel a thing, nothing. We tried. And so we're watching the game, and we're kind of disgusted with the pot. Well, in the meantime, my brother Mark is coming home with his girlfriend, and they had 2 cars, evidently. No, he was on foot. I backed it up. They had his Porsche, and he had a Porsche. Side note here, Mark had some of the coolest cars. I mean, he had a Dodge Challenger, that, you know, like a 73 that was a muscle car. He had this 71 Cougar that he had painted Roman red. I don't know what that means, but that's the color he said it was, and with the hideaway headlights, leather, and it was tits. He had a Lincoln Continental with the suicide doors. He had this white Grand Prix. Mark was always getting really nice cars. So he had this blue Porsche. With that said, it wasn't a Targa or any like fancy Porsche. It was to me, it was like the Volkswagen of Porsches. It was, and he had it painted too. It was blue, and it was beautiful in his eyes. And it was, I mean, it was clean, and he took great care of his car. You know, wiping the diaper on it, you know, just washing it all the time. And it was a nice car. It had a, not a tragic end, but it had a tragedy in its life when he was going to wash it one December, and he had this giant car in the driveway that he drove to work, and he always kept his Porsche in the garage. This is another rabbit trail, but this is good. And me and Rex were in the basement getting high, and Mark was going to wash his car, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to go wash my car," you know, and we smoked some bongs, and he went out in the garage and started up his Porsche, and then he opened the garage door, and he remembered that his huge Chrysler, I mean, it was as big as my house, was parked in the driveway. Well, he proceeded to back the Chrysler out, and when he got to the end of the driveway to back into the spot, he looked up in horror as his Porsche somehow started rolling down the incline of the driveway and crashed into this giant Chrysler, and it put this big upside down V bent in the trunk, and it was a tragedy. And he came in the house, I wrecked my car. You know, me and Rex were like, whatever. What you know, did a bird crap on it or something? Because it was immaculate. And so we went out, and sure as heck, he wrecked that car. And that's just another rabbit trail. But anyway, back to the Bear game, smoking the ditchweed. So we're smoking this ditchweed. Mark came home and had parked his Porsche on the sidewalk, and him and Ellie went for a walk. It was a nice day in November. So we didn't know this, me, Mag, or Forrest. So we're watching the Bear game. The whole house reeks of ditchweed, and we hear a ding-dong, and I go up the steps, and there's the Davenport Police Department, a guy and a chick cop. They're standing there, and they're like, I said, "Hi, hello," and I'm like, you know, freaked out. And I opened the door to talk to them, and they were there about the Porsche on the sidewalk. The neighbors had complained that Mark had blocked the sidewalk with his Porsche. That's what they said. But then when I opened the door to talk to them, because it was a glass door, it wasn't a screen door, and they got a whiff of all that ditchweed, and bam, they were in the house. And they were coming down the steps, and then Mag and Forrest heard the commotion, and Forrest came up, and it was like, you know, bad boys, what you going to do? And we come up, and they actually, seriously, grabbed Forrest by his forearms and turned him up looking for needle tracks. Like, this is all of a sudden, it's a heroin den, you know? And so they didn't find any, of course. And then Mag, you would have liked Mag. Mag said fuck every other word, in all its variations, you know, in, mother, I'm not going to repeat them all because I don't want to do that. But anyways, Meg used the F word very well. And he was getting cocky with the cops, and then they were like, "What's your name?" And he was like, really slowly saying his name. Stephen, big pause. Ray, pause. And they're looking at him as they're writing this down. Magnuson, without that, I said a last name. So anyway, they come downstairs. And as you came downstairs, if you went to the left, the attached garage was there, and there was a door that separated the garage and the house. That's where all the pot was hanging, right outside that door. I mean, 20 pounds of ditchweed hanging. So they come down and they look around, and we had this paraphernalia. We had like a couple bongs and my pot tray and all this stuff. And one of the bongs we had was a U.S. bong. It was a brand, and this sucker was red, white, and blue. It was 3 feet tall. It was a beautiful bong as far as bongs go. And they told me to take that outside and dump it. And we had another smaller bong. So I'm outside dumping these 2 bongs out. And this is about the time that Mark said he was coming back from his walk with his girlfriend, Ellie. And he sees me, and he sees all the neighbors' doors open, screen doors, not all of them, but a lot of them. He said all, but Mark's an exaggerator. But they opened the door, and they were all looking at me as I'm dumping these bongs out, the cop car with the lights going out front. And he ran. And he said he ran down the street, and he cut in between 2 houses, and it was a fenced-in corral, like he's going to jail. That's how he took it. Like, this is what's going to happen to me. I'm going to be incarcerated. I'm going to be trapped. So anyway, back at the house, the lady cop started to walk down the hallway. And I'm not exaggerating here. I typically don't exaggerate stories at all. She was heading down the hallway where the garage door was. And she literally had her hand on the door, where if she had walked out, she would have been hit in the face by all this pot. And she had her hand on the door, and her partner said, "Hey, check this out." So she let go of the door and went in the other room, and Forrest and Mag kind of stood in front of the hallway then, like kind of blocking the view. Just I don't know why, just to maybe hide it. But anyways, my roommate Mike, who wasn't there, his folks owned this antique shop. And for some reason, we had this antique scale in the house, like we're drug dealing and we're weighing shit out. And so they were looking at this scale, and then we had a couple unusual pipes, and so they were smelling the pipes, and they were looking at the scale, and it was, this big deal. But it saved our butt that she didn't walk in that door, or there might have been some jail time for somebody, probably the homeowner, Mark, maybe. I mean, I don't know. It's all speculation, but we were all freaked out, except for Mag. He was cocky. So anyway, they proceeded to only find that little bit of pot that was on my tray. And I'm sure in the guise of their police work, it wasn't that big a deal for them what they were doing, but it was huge for us. So they gave us a lecture, a stern lecture about pot and how they're going to be watching our house, and they left. Just like that, they were gone. It was like 20 minutes. 20 minutes of absolute fear and anxiety, but then they were gone. Big sigh of relief. And I will say this. I didn't smoke pot for 3 days. 3 days without. But that's my story. Every word is true. I'm trying to think of anything else that happened with the details. We got rid of the pot. We threw it in my truck and threw it back in the ditch where it belonged. And went back on our merry buzzhead ways. I did smoke pot until 1981. And like I said, I was one who always overdid. And I got to where I got paranoid when I did it. I wish I hadn't overdid, because I think it's pretty harmless occasionally, probably. But and to be honest, I have smoked pot in the last 10 years, and there was a reason. It wasn't just, hey, let's get high. It's a story that I'll tell another time. But even then, the paranoia thing came back a bit. But so it's not in my mind to do that anymore. That ship has sailed a long time ago. But anyway, that's my story of the near drug bust in Davenport, Iowa in 1980. It was all true.